On a freezing night, twin orphans, desperate for warmth, sneak into a wealthy man's mansion. What could have ended in punishment turns into an act of kindness so profound, it will restore your faith in humanity. What the rich man does next will melt your heart and leave you inspired. The biting wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it the stinging chill of a winter night. Snowflakes danced in the air, piling into mounds on the sidewalks, and the streetlights cast an icy glow over the deserted neighborhood. Hidden in the shadows of a crumbling alleyway, Emma and Ethan, twin siblings no older than 10, huddled together for warmth. Their thin coats, tattered and threadbare, did little to shield them from the bitter cold. Emma tightened her grip on Ethan, rubbing his frost-bitten hands in hers. "We can't stay here much longer," she whispered, her voice trembling with both cold and fear. "We'll freeze." Ethan, his lips a pale shade of blue, nodded faintly. "But where can we go, Emma? We've tried everywhere," he murmured. The pair had been turned away from every shelter they could find, with no room for two more. Emma looked around, her sharp gaze scanning the rows of buildings. Then, her eyes caught sight of a grand mansion standing at the top of a hill. Its tall iron gates were slightly ajar, as if inviting them in. Warm lights glowed through its large windows, and the faint outline of a fireplace crackling inside painted a picture of comfort they could only dream of. "There," Emma said, pointing. "The big house. They won't miss us if we just stay in a corner for the night." Ethan's eyes widened in hesitation. "What if they catch us? What if they call the police?" "They won't. We'll be quiet," Emma assured him, though doubt gnawed at her words. Desperation overruled fear. If they stayed in the alley, the cold would surely claim them by morning. With Ethan shivering at her side, she made the decision. "Come on." Hand in hand, the twins approached the mansion. The gate creaked loudly as Emma pushed it open, making her heart pound in her chest. "Shh," she whispered to Ethan. "Stay close." They crept across the snow-covered garden, their small footprints trailing behind them. The mansion loomed above them like a silent guardian, its towering presence both intimidating and alluring. Emma spotted a back door that had been left slightly ajar, perhaps by a careless servant, and she seized the opportunity. With a quiet but determined push, the door opened, and the twins slipped inside. Warmth enveloped them instantly, a sharp contrast to the freezing air outside. The scent of baked bread and roasted meat lingered faintly in the air, making their empty stomachs ache. Ethan stared wide-eyed at the opulence around them. Marble floors, intricate chandeliers, and walls adorned with paintings that seemed to tell stories of wealth and history. Emma tugged at his arm. "We can't stay here. Someone will see us. Let's find a quiet spot." The twins tiptoed through the mansion, their small frames blending into the shadows. They eventually found a nook near the fireplace in a grand living room. The crackling fire offered a warmth they hadn't felt in days, and for the first time that night, Ethan smiled faintly. "This feels like a dream," he whispered. Emma nodded, but her ears were perked for any sound of footsteps. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. "Just rest for a bit. We'll leave before anyone notices." As the twins settled into the cozy corner, the heavy front door of the mansion opened with a groan. Mr. Anderson, the mansion's owner, stepped inside, shaking snow off his expensive coat. His sharp, calculating eyes took in the scene. Everything seemed as he'd left it, except for the faint footprints in the snow leading inside. Frowning, he called out, "Marcus, have you been careless again with the back door?" There was no response. Mr. Anderson's jaw tightened, and he strode deeper into the house, his footsteps echoing through the hall. His keen instincts told him something was amiss. The sound of heavy footsteps grew louder, echoing against the marble floors. Emma's eyes snapped open as her heart raced. She quickly nudged Ethan, who had just started to doze off, his cheeks tinged with warmth from the fire. "Ethan, wake up, someone's here," she whispered urgently. Ethan blinked, confused and groggy. "What? What's happening?" Emma grabbed his hand, her gaze darting around the room for a hiding spot, but before they could move, the living room lights flickered on, illuminating every corner of the grand space. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Anderson, his sharp features etched with suspicion. "What on earth?" His voice was low and stern as his eyes fell on the two small figures crouched by the fireplace. His presence filled the room, and for a moment, neither Emma nor Ethan could find their voice. Emma instinctively stepped in front of Ethan, shielding him as if her small frame could protect them both. "We're sorry," she blurted out. her voice trembling. "We didn't mean to. We just needed a place to stay for the night." Mr. Anderson's piercing gaze softened slightly as he took in the sight of the two children. Their clothes were worn, their faces pale, and their eyes carried the weight of hardship far beyond their years. Still, he kept his tone firm. "Who are you, and why are you in my house?" "I'm Emma, and this is my brother Ethan," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've been out in the cold all night. We didn't have anywhere else to go. We didn't mean any harm." Ethan clung to Emma's arm, his wide eyes fixed on Mr. Anderson. "We'll leave right now, sir. We're sorry for trespassing." Mr. Anderson crossed his arms, studying them carefully. There was no malice in their eyes, only fear and desperation. He took a deep breath, his expression softening. "You're lucky I'm the one who found you and not one of the staff. If anyone else had, you'd already be on your way to the police." Emma's stomach sank. "Please don't call them," she pleaded. "We'll leave right now, just don't call the police." Mr. Anderson sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. There was a long pause as he debated what to do. He was a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor, someone who valued discipline and order above all else. Yet, as he looked at the frightened children before him, he couldn't bring himself to follow through with the logical course of action. "Sit down," he said finally, motioning to the plush sofa nearby. Emma hesitated, unsure if she could trust him. Ethan tugged at her sleeve. "Emma, maybe we should listen," he whispered. Reluctantly, she guided Ethan to the sofa, and they sat down, their small frames barely making a dent in the oversized furniture. Mr. Anderson took a seat across from them, his posture rigid as he studied them further. "You're both clearly in a bad situation," he said. "Tell me the truth. Where are your parents?" Emma's throat tightened. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "They're gone," she said softly. "Our mom passed away a year ago, and our dad, he left us. We've been on our own ever since." Ethan sniffled beside her, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "We tried to find help, but no one had room for us." Mr. Anderson felt a pang in his chest. He wasn't a sentimental man by any means, but the raw honesty in their voices stirred something within him. "You've been living on the streets this whole time?" Emma nodded. "We've been trying to manage, but it's been really hard. We didn't want to steal or hurt anyone. We just needed to get warm." Mr. Anderson leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He thought about the countless reports he'd read in the news about homeless children falling through the cracks of the system, their lives spiraling into despair. These two could easily become just another statistic. He stood abruptly, startling the twins. "Stay here," he said firmly. "Don't move." Emma's heart sank. Was he going to call the authorities after all? She clutched Ethan's hand tightly, both of them too afraid to move. Moments later, Mr. Anderson returned, carrying a thick blanket and 2 steaming cups of cocoa. "Here," he said, draping the blanket over them and handing each a cup. "Drink this. You'll feel better." Emma stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You're not turning us in?" Mr. Anderson sighed, his stern expression softening. "Not tonight, but I need time to figure out what to do next." Ethan eagerly sipped the cocoa, the warmth spreading through his small body. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. Emma hesitated before taking a sip, her trust in adults hard-won. "Why are you helping us?" she asked cautiously. Mr. Anderson looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Because everyone deserves a chance, and right now it looks like you need one more than anyone else." The warmth of the cocoa and the softness of the blanket began to ease Emma and Ethan's tension, but they remained wary. Emma's eyes followed Mr. Anderson as he sat back in his chair, his posture exuding authority, yet carrying an air of contemplation. "Emma, Ethan," Mr. Anderson began, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not the type to give handouts or make decisions lightly, but you've piqued my curiosity, and I'd like to know more about how you ended up in this situation." Emma glanced at Ethan, silently deciding how much she should reveal. She straightened her back, meeting Mr. Anderson's gaze with a mixture of courage and vulnerability. "After our mom passed, we stayed with our dad for a while," she began. Her voice wavered, but she pushed on. He couldn't handle it. He started drinking, and he left one day and didn't come back." Ethan's small voice chimed in, his words punctuated by quiet sniffles. "We waited for him, but he never came back. We didn't know where else to go." Emma placed a comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder, shielding him with her presence as much as she could. "We tried to stay in shelters," she continued, "but they were always full. We've been moving from place to place, doing whatever we can to survive." Mr. Anderson's stern facade didn't falter, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of empathy. He crossed his arms, leaning forward slightly. "How old are you both?" "I'm 14, Emma answered. "Ethan just turned 8. 14 and 8, Mr. Anderson repeated, his tone heavy with thought. "And you've been looking after him all this time?" Emma nodded. "He's my little brother. It's my job to protect him." Mr. Anderson's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he leaned back in his chair. There was something in her defiant resilience that reminded him of someone he used to know, someone who had once been a central part of his life. "I wasn't always a businessman, you know," Mr. Anderson said, his voice softer now. The admission caught Emma off guard, and she raised an eyebrow. "A long time ago, I had nothing. Grew up in a small town with barely enough to eat and a roof that leaked every time it rained. I had to fight for everything I have today." Ethan's eyes widened. "You were poor too?" Mr. Anderson nodded. "Poorer than you could imagine, but I had someone who believed in me, someone who gave me a chance when no one else would. Without that person, I wouldn't be here." Emma's suspicion didn't waver entirely, but a flicker of curiosity sparked in her gaze. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible," he replied, his tone solemn. "To think the world's forgotten you. I'm telling you because I see a bit of myself in you, Emma." His words hung in the air, and for the first time Emma's guarded expression softened. She hadn't expected compassion from someone like him, a man who clearly had everything. The contrast between their lives was stark, yet there was something genuine in his tone that made her want to believe him. Ethan looked at Mr. Anderson with wide, hopeful eyes. "Does that mean you're going to help us?" Mr. Anderson's lips pressed into a thin line as he considered his next words. "I'll help you," he said finally, "but on one condition." Emma tensed, her defenses snapping back into place. "What condition?" "That you both trust me," Mr. Anderson said, his voice firm. "I'm not saying it'll be easy, and I'm not promising a perfect solution, but if you're willing to work with me, I'll do what I can to get you back on your feet." Emma hesitated. Trust wasn't something she gave freely, especially not to strangers. But the alternative, a life of endless uncertainty and hardship, wasn't something she wanted for Ethan. She glanced at her brother, who was looking at her with pleading eyes. "Emma," he whispered, "please, let's try." Emma swallowed her doubt, nodding reluctantly. "Okay, we'll trust you." Mr. Anderson stood, his commanding presence filling the room. "Good. Now let's start with the basics. You'll stay here for the night, and tomorrow we'll figure out the next steps." Ethan's face lit up with relief, but Emma's mind was already racing with questions. Who was this man? Why was he so willing to help? And more importantly, could she really trust him? The morning light filtered through the large windows of Mr. Anderson's luxurious penthouse, illuminating the spacious living room where Emma and Ethan had spent the night. Emma woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the plush surroundings. It was a stark contrast to the cold, hard floors of the places they usually found themselves in. Ethan was still asleep, curled up on the soft couch, his small frame relaxed in a way Emma hadn't seen in weeks. She let out a sigh of relief. For one night at least, he had been able to rest without fear. As she stood and stretched, the door to the kitchen opened, and Mr. Anderson walked in, carrying a tray laden with breakfast, pancakes, eggs, and fresh fruit. He placed it on the table in front of her, his expression neutral but his actions thoughtful. "Good morning," he greeted. "I thought you two might be hungry." Emma hesitated before nodding. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan stirred at the scent of food, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw the tray, his face lit up with excitement. "Pancakes!" he exclaimed, sitting up quickly. Mr. Anderson chuckled, watching as Ethan eagerly began to eat. Emma, however, approached the tray cautiously, her wariness still intact. She picked at her food, her thoughts racing. "What's the plan now?" she asked, her tone guarded. Mr. Anderson took a seat across from her, his gaze steady. "First, we'll get you both cleaned up and properly dressed," he began. "Then, I'll take you to meet someone who can help." Emma narrowed her eyes. "Help how?" "I have a contact who runs a shelter for families in need," he explained. "It's not just a place to stay. It's a program designed to help people rebuild their lives. Job training, counseling, and support for kids like Ethan to go to school. Ethan looked up from his plate, his mouth full of pancakes. "I can go to school?" he asked, his excitement palpable. Mr. Anderson nodded. "If you want to, yes." Emma's heart ached at Ethan's enthusiasm. He had always loved school, but they hadn't been able to stay in one place long enough for him to attend consistently. The thought of giving him that stability filled her with hope, but it also made her cautious. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "You don't even know us." Mr. Anderson leaned forward, his expression serious. "I told you last night. I've been where you are, and someone helped me when I thought there was no way out. I'm just paying it forward." Emma wanted to believe him, but the years of disappointment and betrayal had taught her to be skeptical. Still, she couldn't deny that his actions so far had been genuine. "All right," she said finally. "We'll try it." Mr. Anderson stood, his commanding presence filling the room once again. "Good. Let's get started." After breakfast, Mr. Anderson led them to a guest room stocked with clean clothes and toiletries. Emma was surprised to find items that fit them both perfectly, as if he had known their sizes. She and Ethan took turns showering, the hot water washing away weeks of grime and exhaustion. When they emerged, dressed in fresh clothes, they barely recognized themselves. Ethan beamed, his clean face and neatly combed hair making him look younger and more carefree. Emma felt a small spark of confidence she hadn't felt in a long time. "Ready?" Mr. Anderson asked when they returned to the living room. Emma nodded, gripping Ethan's hand tightly. Together, they followed Mr. Anderson to his car, a sleek black sedan that seemed as out of place in their lives as the penthouse did. The drive was quiet, with Ethan staring out the window in awe at the bustling city, while Emma kept stealing glances at Mr. Anderson, still trying to decipher his motives. They arrived at a modest building tucked away in a quieter part of the city. A sign above the entrance read, "New Horizons Family Center." The name alone filled Emma with a cautious sense of hope. Inside, they were greeted by a kind woman named Mrs. Green, the director of the center. She was a middle-aged woman with warm eyes and a reassuring smile that immediately put Ethan at ease. "Mr. Anderson told me about you," Mrs. Green said, her voice gentle. "You're both very brave to have made it this far. We're here to help you take the next step." Emma wasn't sure how to respond. She felt a mix of gratitude and vulnerability, emotions she wasn't used to expressing. But when Ethan squeezed her hand and smiled up at her, she found herself nodding. Mrs. Green gave them a tour of the facility, showing them the shared living spaces, the classrooms for children, and the counseling offices. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean, safe, and full of people who seemed genuinely invested in helping others. By the end of the tour, Emma felt a cautious sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, it seemed like they had found a place where they could rest and rebuild. As they settled into their new room at the center, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, watching Ethan unpack the small backpack that held all their belongings. His face was lit with excitement as he arranged his things in the drawers, humming a tune she hadn't heard in months. "Emma," he said suddenly, turning to her with wide eyes, "do you think we're going to be okay now?" She swallowed hard, her throat tightening with emotion. "I don't know, Ethan," she admitted, "but it feels like we might be." Ethan nodded, his smile unwavering. "I like Mr. Anderson. He's like a hero." Emma's lips curved into a small smile. "Yeah, maybe he is." As she lay down that night, listening to Ethan's steady breathing, Emma allowed herself to hope. It was a fragile hope, but it was there, a flickering light in the darkness that had consumed them for so long. The days at the New Horizons Family Center began to establish a rhythm that Emma and Ethan hadn't experienced in years. Each morning, the center bustled with activity. Parents attending workshops, children heading off to school, and staff members offering guidance and encouragement. The structured environment was new to Emma, but it was a welcome change from the chaos they had been living in. Ethan adapted quickly. He was enrolled in the center's on-site school program, where he made friends and caught up on the learning he had missed. His laughter, once rare, now filled their small room at the end of each day as he recounted stories of his new adventures. Emma, on the other hand, found it harder to adjust. The center offered workshops and counseling sessions, but trusting others, especially adults who promised to help, wasn't something that came easily to her. Years of disappointment had built walls around her heart, and while she appreciated the safety of the center, she kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mrs. Green, the center's director, noticed Emma's hesitancy and approached her one afternoon during a quiet moment in the common area. "Emma," she said, sitting down beside her, "how are you settling in?" Emma hesitated, her gaze fixed on the book in her lap. "It's fine," she replied simply. Mrs. Green smiled gently. "I know this is a big change for both of you, and I know it's not easy to trust people after everything you've been through." Emma looked up, surprised by Mrs. Green's insight. "It's just hard," she admitted. "Every time someone said they'd help us before, it ended up making things worse." Mrs. Green nodded. "That's understandable, but I want you to know that we're here for the long haul. We're not going to let you down." Emma's eyes searched Mrs. Green's face, trying to find any hint of insincerity, but she saw only kindness. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, these people were different. Meanwhile, Mr. Anderson continued to check in on Emma and Ethan regularly. He wasn't just a benefactor, he was genuinely invested in their well-being. Every few days, he would stop by the center, bringing small gifts for Ethan, or updates on job opportunities for Emma. During one visit, he sat down with Emma in the courtyard while Ethan played with the other children. "How are things going here?" he asked. Emma shrugged, her guarded nature still intact. "Ethan loves it. He's doing great." "And you?" Mr. Anderson pressed gently. She hesitated, unsure of how much to share. "I'm trying. It's just hard to believe this is real." Mr. Anderson nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. Trust isn't built overnight, but I can tell you this. I believe in you, Emma. You're stronger than you know." His words struck a chord in her, but she didn't know how to respond. Instead, she looked away, watching Ethan laugh as he chased a ball across the grass. A part of her wanted to believe Mr. Anderson, but the scars of the past weren't so easily erased. As weeks turned into months, Emma began to open up more. She attended counseling sessions at the center, where she learned to process the trauma of her past and rebuild her confidence. The counselors encouraged her to think about her future, what she wanted to do, who she wanted to become. "I don't know," Emma admitted during one session. "All I've ever done is take care of Ethan. I don't even know what I'm good at." The counselor smiled encouragingly. "Taking care of someone is no small thing, Emma. It shows resilience, compassion, and strength. Those are qualities that can take you far." The idea of a future, a real future, was both thrilling and terrifying. Emma had spent so long in survival mode that the thought of dreaming about anything more felt foreign. But slowly, she began to consider the possibilities. One evening, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Emma sat at the small desk in their room, jotting down ideas on a piece of paper. She thought about the things she had always been curious about: writing, working with children, maybe even becoming a teacher someday. The list felt like a small victory, a step toward believing that she could have a life beyond the struggles that had defined her so far. Mr. Anderson noticed the changes in Emma. During one of his visits, he pulled her aside. "You seem different," he observed. "More hopeful." Emma nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I guess I am. It's still hard to trust, but things are better. Ethan's happy, and that means everything to me." Mr. Anderson's expression softened. "You've done an incredible job taking care of him, Emma, but now it's time to take care of yourself too." His words lingered in her mind long after he left. For so long, her focus had been on Ethan, and she had pushed her own needs aside. But now, for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she deserved happiness too. As Emma and Ethan continued to thrive at the center, they became part of a community, a network of people who understood their struggles and supported their growth. Emma made friends with other residents, shared her story during group sessions, and even began helping out with the younger children at the center's daycare. One evening, as she tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. "Emma, do you think we'll be okay now?" She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and smiled. "I think we will, Ethan. I really think we will." For the first time in years, Emma felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but they were no longer alone. They had a place to call home, people who cared about them, and a future that was beginning to take shape. The community at New Horizons Family Center became more than just a safe haven for Emma and Ethan. It became a place of transformation. With every passing week, Emma felt herself shedding the layers of fear and self-doubt that had weighed her down for so long. She began to see not only a future for Ethan, but also for herself. One morning, as Emma helped set up a breakfast table for the residents, Mrs. Green approached her with a warm smile. "Emma, do you have a moment?" Emma wiped her hands on her apron and nodded. "Of course." Mrs. Green led her to the office where a folder sat on the desk. "We've been observing how much you've grown here, Emma," she began. "Your resilience, your willingness to help others, and your natural ability with children. These are remarkable qualities. I wanted to discuss an opportunity with you." Emma tilted her head in curiosity. "An opportunity?" Mrs. Green opened the folder, revealing a flyer for a child development program at a nearby community college. "We have partnerships with organizations that help our residents further their education. I thought this might be something you'd consider." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She stared at the flyer, the words blurring as a mix of excitement and self-doubt swirled within her. I've never even thought about going to college," she admitted. "Do you think I could do it?" Mrs. Green reached across the desk and placed a comforting hand on Emma's. "Absolutely. You've already proven how capable you are. This program would allow you to build on your natural talents and create a stable future for yourself and Ethan." The idea consumed Emma's thoughts for days. She couldn't shake the feeling that this could be the fresh start she had always longed for. But there were also doubts. Who would take care of Ethan while she attended classes? Could she really balance school, motherhood, and the responsibilities of rebuilding their lives? During Mr. Anderson's next visit, Emma shared her concerns. "Mrs. Green thinks I should enroll in a child development program," she said hesitantly, "but I don't know if I can handle it." Mr. Anderson listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "Emma, you've already faced challenges most people can't imagine. If anyone can juggle these responsibilities, it's you, and you won't be doing it alone. The center and I are here to support you every step of the way." His unwavering confidence in her sparked something within Emma. For so long, she had carried the burden of their struggles alone. The thought of having a support system to lean on felt both foreign and liberating. Determined to take the next step, Emma enrolled in the program. The first day of class was daunting. She walked into the lecture hall clutching her notebook, her nerves on edge as she took a seat near the back. The professor, a kind woman with years of experience in early childhood education, greeted the class warmly and began outlining the semester's curriculum. As the weeks progressed, Emma found herself enthralled by the coursework. She learned about child psychology, educational techniques, and the importance of creating nurturing environments for children. The material resonated deeply with her own experiences, and she began to see how her journey could inspire and guide others. Ethan was her biggest cheerleader. Each evening, as they sat together at the small desk in their room, he would color while she studied. "Are you going to be a teacher, Emma?" he asked one night, his voice filled with admiration. Emma smiled, ruffling his hair. "Maybe one day. For now, I'm just trying to learn as much as I can." Back at the center, Emma's newfound confidence began to shine. She started volunteering more with the daycare program, applying what she was learning in her classes. The children adored her, and the staff noticed her growing skills. "You have a gift, Emma," one of the daycare workers remarked. "The kids light up around you, and you've got a way of understanding them that's rare." Emma blushed at the compliment, but deep down she felt a sense of pride. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. One afternoon, Mrs. Green called Emma into her office again. "Emma, I have some wonderful news," she said, beaming. "We've been looking for an assistant in the daycare program, and I'd like to offer you the position." Emma's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you serious? Me?" "Absolutely," Mrs. Green replied. "You've shown incredible dedication and talent. This is a chance to gain hands-on experience and earn a little extra income while you continue your education." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she nodded. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The job brought a sense of purpose and stability to Emma's life. Each day she balanced her classes, her work at the daycare, and her time with Ethan. It wasn't easy, but the support of the center and the encouragement from Mr. Anderson made all the difference. Mr. Anderson continued to check in regularly, his visits a source of comfort and inspiration. "You're doing amazing, Emma," he said during one visit. "I hope you're as proud of yourself as we all are." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I'm starting to be. For the first time in a long time, I feel like things are finally falling into place." Emma's progress was undeniable. Her dedication to her education and her work at the daycare not only enriched her life, but also brought her closer to the community that had embraced her and Ethan. Yet, amidst the strides she was making, Emma remained curious about the man who had set these changes in motion, Mr. Anderson. One late afternoon, after a fulfilling day at the daycare, Emma sat down with Ethan in their shared space at the center. Ethan, his energy endless, was busy constructing a tower with wooden blocks. Emma, meanwhile, thumbed through a parenting magazine. A knock on the door interrupted their quiet moment. "Come in," she called. The door opened to reveal Mr. Anderson, holding a brown envelope in his hands. His usual kind demeanor was accompanied by a look of anticipation. "Good evening, Emma," he greeted. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Emma replied warmly. "Please come in." As he stepped inside, Ethan looked up from his blocks and waved enthusiastically. "Hi, Mr. Anderson." Mr. Anderson crouched down, offering a high five to Ethan before turning his attention back to Emma. "I wanted to share something with you. May I?" Curiosity piqued, Emma nodded. "Of course." Mr. Anderson handed her the envelope. Emma opened it carefully, pulling out a series of old photographs. Her eyes widened as she examined each one. They were black and white images of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to herself. "This is my mother," Mr. Anderson said softly, his voice tinged with emotion. "Her name was Eleanor." Emma looked up, confused but intrigued. "She's beautiful, but why are you showing me this?" Mr. Anderson sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "Eleanor grew up in this city, not far from where you and Ethan used to live. She had a heart of gold and dedicated her life to helping those in need. Unfortunately, she passed away when I was young. But before she died, she taught me the importance of kindness and giving back." Emma listened intently, sensing there was more to the story. "One day, when I first started volunteering at the center, I met a young woman who reminded me so much of her," Mr. Anderson continued. "That woman was you, Emma." Emma's breath hitched. "Me? But I don't understand." "I see the same selflessness and determination in you that my mother had," he explained. "You've endured so much, yet you've managed to rise above it all while staying kind and compassionate. When I saw you that day at the diner, helping someone despite your own struggles, it reminded me of her." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she processed his words. "That's why you decided to help me?" Mr. Anderson nodded. "It was part of it. But the truth is, you deserved that help, Emma. You deserved a chance to rebuild your life, not because you reminded me of someone else, but because of the person you are." Emma sat in stunned silence, her emotions swirling. She had always wondered why Mr. Anderson had gone out of his way for her and Ethan. Now she understood that his kindness came from a deeply personal place, rooted in love and memory. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for what you've done." Mr. Anderson shook his head, a gentle smile on his face. "There's nothing to repay, Emma. Seeing you thrive is all the thanks I need. But if you really want to honor this journey, promise me one thing." Emma leaned forward, eager to hear his words. "What is it?" "When you're in a position to help someone else, do it. Pass on the kindness. That's how we keep this cycle of compassion alive." Emma nodded, the weight of his request settling in her heart. "I promise." Their conversation marked a turning point in Emma's life. From that day on, she carried Mr. Anderson's story and Eleanor's legacy with her. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond her immediate goals, inspiring her to dream bigger and think about the impact she could have on others. Later that evening, as Emma tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mommy, are we happy now?" Emma smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, we are, and we're going to keep making things even better." As Ethan drifted off to sleep, Emma sat by the window, gazing out at the city lights. For the first time in years, she felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. Her path had been filled with hardships, but it had also brought her to a place of hope and transformation. She whispered a silent thank you to the universe, for the strangers who had become friends, for the second chances she had been given, and for the opportunity to create a brighter future for herself and her son. The days following Mr. Anderson's heartfelt revelation brought a newfound clarity to Emma's life. She felt as if her world had expanded, not just through the opportunities she had been given, but through the understanding of how her story intertwined with the lives of others. It wasn't just about her and Ethan anymore. It was about building a legacy, much like Mr. Anderson's mother Eleanor had done. As Emma settled into her routine at the daycare, she found herself reflecting more on her own journey. Her struggles and triumphs had shaped her, and now she felt compelled to share her story. The daycare had become a place where she not only cared for children, but also connected deeply with their families. She began to see her work as more than just a job. It was a chance to inspire hope and show others that change was possible. One afternoon, as Emma prepared snacks for the children, the director of the daycare, Mrs. Jensen, approached her with a clipboard. Her warm smile hinted at good news. "Emma," Mrs. Jensen began, "I've been meaning to talk to you. We've been so impressed with the work you've done here. The children adore you, and the parents have nothing but positive things to say." Emma felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Mrs. Jensen. That means a lot to me." Mrs. Jensen held out the clipboard. "We're expanding the daycare to include an after-school program for older children, and I think you'd be perfect to help run it. You've shown great leadership and empathy, and I believe you'd bring a lot to the role." Emma stared at the clipboard, the words blurring slightly as her mind raced. It was an opportunity she hadn't expected, but one that filled her with excitement. "I'd love to," she replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "Thank you for trusting me with this." As she signed the document, Emma felt a surge of pride. This was more than a promotion. It was a symbol of her growth and the trust others now placed in her. That evening, she shared the news with Mr. Anderson over tea. His face lit up with pride as she recounted the conversation with Mrs. Jensen. "Emma, that's wonderful," he said, raising his cup in a toast. "This is just the beginning for you." Emma smiled, the weight of his belief in her settling warmly in her chest. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. Thank you for seeing something in me when I couldn't see it myself." Mr. Anderson shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "You've always had it within you, Emma. Sometimes, all it takes is for someone to remind us of our own strength." The after-school program launched 2 weeks later, and Emma threw herself into the role with enthusiasm. She planned activities that encouraged creativity and teamwork, drawing on her own experiences to connect with the children. It wasn't long before she became a favorite among the students, who admired her kindness and ability to listen. One day, as Emma organized an art project, a boy named Liam approached her hesitantly. He was new to the program and had been shy since his arrival. "Miss Emma," he began softly, "do you think people can really change?" Emma knelt to his level, her eyes meeting his. "I do, Liam. I think everyone has the power to change and grow. Sometimes all it takes is a little help and a lot of courage." Her words seemed to resonate with him, and as Liam returned to his seat, Emma realized how much her own journey had prepared her to offer those words of encouragement. She was becoming the kind of person she had needed during her darkest moments. Meanwhile, Ethan was thriving. The structured environment of the daycare had brought out the best in him, and he was making friends with ease. Emma often found herself watching him play with the other children, her heart swelling with gratitude for how far they had come. Ethan's teacher, Ms. Rivera, approached Emma one afternoon as she picked him up. "Ethan is such a bright boy," Ms. Rivera said with a smile. "He has a natural curiosity and a kind heart. I can tell he's going to do great things." Emma's eyes welled with tears at the compliment. "Thank you, Ms. Rivera. That means so much to me." As they walked home, Ethan chattered excitedly about his day, his energy infectious. Emma held his hand tightly, silently promising herself that she would do everything in her power to nurture his potential. One quiet evening, Emma sat at her desk, a cup of tea in hand. She opened her journal, something she had kept sporadically over the years, and began to write. This time, her words weren't filled with despair or uncertainty. They were filled with hope. She wrote about her journey, the people who had helped her, and the lessons she had learned. As the words flowed, an idea began to form in her mind. What if she could share her story with a larger audience? What if her experiences could inspire others to keep going, even when life seemed insurmountable? The next morning, Emma approached Mr. Anderson with her idea. He listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "I think it's a wonderful idea, Emma," he said. "Your story has the power to inspire. I know it's not easy to put yourself out there, but I believe in you." With his encouragement, Emma began drafting a speech, one that she hoped to share at local community events. She poured her heart into it, weaving her journey with lessons of resilience and kindness. Emma's first speaking engagement was at the daycare's annual fundraiser. Standing in front of a room full of parents, teachers, and community members, she felt a familiar nervousness creep in. But as she looked out at the faces of those who had supported her, she found the strength to begin. "Good evening, everyone," she started, her voice steady. "A year ago, I never imagined I'd be standing here sharing my story with all of you. Life has a way of surprising us, of testing our limits, and sometimes of showing us just how strong we can be." Her words resonated with the audience, who listened intently as she recounted her journey. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, and Emma felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known before. That night, as she and Ethan walked home, Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her life had transformed in ways she never imagined, and she knew it was only the beginning. She had found her purpose, not just in providing for her son, but in sharing her story to inspire others to believe in second chances and the power of kindness. Emma's story began to ripple through the community, touching lives in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her speech at the daycare fundraiser not only raised a record amount for the program, but also inspired several attendees to step forward with offers of support, mentorship, and opportunities. Among them was a woman named Claire, a local journalist who had been moved by Emma's authenticity. "Emma," Claire said after the event, approaching her with a warm smile, "your story is extraordinary. I'd love to write a feature about you for our community magazine. I think people need to hear this." Emma hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the idea of sharing her story on a larger platform felt daunting. But then she thought of all the times she had been scared and persevered anyway. "I'd be honored," she replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. The article was published a month later under the title, "From Struggle to Strength: One Woman's Journey of Resilience and Hope." It included photos of Emma at the daycare, a smiling Ethan, and a candid shot of her speaking at the fundraiser. The piece highlighted not only her journey but also the importance of community support in helping people rebuild their lives. The response was overwhelming. Readers sent letters and emails, sharing their own stories of struggle and expressing how Emma's courage had inspired them. Local organizations reached out, asking Emma to speak at their events. Even a small publishing house approached her with an idea for a book. Emma was floored. She had never seen herself as a writer or a public figure. She was just a mother trying to make a better life for her son. But now it seemed she had the chance to make an even bigger impact. "Do you think I can do this?" she asked Mr. Anderson one evening, showing him the emails and offers she had received. Mr. Anderson chuckled, his eyes twinkling with pride. "Emma, you've already done the hardest part, believing in yourself. The rest is just sharing what you've learned. And trust me, people will listen." Encouraged, Emma began working on a manuscript. Writing was challenging, but it was also cathartic. She poured her heart into each page, recounting her darkest moments and the people who had lifted her out of them. She wrote about Mr. Anderson's kindness, the transformative power of community, and the unyielding love she had for Ethan. Through this process, Emma discovered a strength she hadn't fully realized she possessed. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a storyteller, a mentor, and a beacon of hope. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to thrive. His teachers noted his enthusiasm for learning and his knack for helping classmates. It seemed he had inherited Emma's compassion and resilience. One afternoon, as they worked on a school project together, Ethan looked up at Emma with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," he said, "you always tell me to help people because it's the right thing to do. Is that what Mr. Anderson did for you?" Emma paused, her heart swelling with emotion. "Yes, Ethan. That's exactly what he did, and now we get to do the same for others." The daycare's after-school program became a hub for Emma's initiatives. She started a mentorship group for parents who were struggling, offering them guidance and a listening ear. She partnered with local nonprofits to provide resources for families in need. The program became more than a place for children. It became a lifeline for the community. One day, as Emma set up for a meeting, a familiar figure walked through the door. It was Jane, the waitress who had mocked her for helping Ethan that fateful day. "Hi, Emma," Jane said hesitantly, her eyes downcast. I saw the article about you. I've been thinking a lot about what happened back then. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I was wrong, and you were brave." Emma was taken aback but quickly recovered. "Thank you, Jane. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong. I appreciate you coming here. Jane nodded, her voice trembling. I've been struggling myself lately, and seeing what you've done, it's given me hope. I was wondering if I could join your mentorship group. Emma smiled, her heart filled with compassion. Of course, Jane. We're all here to help each other. Jane's presence in the group marked a turning point for Emma. It was a reminder that kindness had a ripple effect, reaching places she could never have anticipated. As Emma's manuscript neared completion, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Every struggle, every challenge, every act of kindness. It had all led to this moment. She thought of Ethan, Mr. Anderson, and the countless people who had become part of her story. Each of them had played a role in shaping her path. When the book was finally published, it was titled, A Table for Hope: How Kindness Transforms Lives. The launch event was held at the daycare, and the turnout was beyond Emma's wildest dreams. Families, community leaders, and even strangers who had read the article came to celebrate her achievement. As Emma signed copies of her book, she looked up to see Mr. Anderson standing at the back of the room, a proud smile on his face. She excused herself and walked over to him, holding out a signed copy. "This is for you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "None of this would have been possible without you." Mr. Anderson took the book, his eyes glistening. "Emma, you've done something extraordinary. I'm just grateful I got to be a small part of it." That night, as Emma and Ethan walked home, she felt a profound sense of peace. Her journey wasn't over, but she knew she was on the right path. She had found her purpose, and she was ready to continue making a difference. One story, one act of kindness, and one ripple at a time. Emma's story didn't just touch her local community. It began to spread far beyond. As her book gained attention, invitations poured in for her to speak at events, conferences, and schools. Each time she shared her journey with honesty and vulnerability, reminding audiences of the power of compassion and the incredible changes it could spark. One of her most significant speaking engagements came at a national nonprofit summit in Washington, D.C. The audience included influential leaders, philanthropists, and policymakers. As Emma stood on the grand stage, she felt a wave of nerves wash over her. But then she thought of Ethan, the boy who had changed her life, and the countless others who had supported her journey. They were the reason she was here. Emma began her speech with a simple but powerful statement. Kindness doesn't just change lives, it saves them. I'm standing here today because someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. She recounted the pivotal moments of her story, meeting Ethan, her struggles as a waitress, and the life-changing encounter with Mr. Anderson. Her words resonated deeply, and by the end of her speech, the audience gave her a standing ovation. After the event, Emma was approached by a representative from a national charity focused on eradicating homelessness. "Your story is exactly what we need to inspire people," the woman said. "We'd love to partner with you to create a program that helps homeless youth find mentors and support." Emma's heart raced at the idea. She had already seen the impact mentorship could have through her work at the daycare. This was an opportunity to scale that impact on a national level. "I'd love to be involved," she said, her voice filled with excitement. Back home, Emma shared the news with Ethan and Mr. Anderson. "This program could help so many kids like Ethan," she said, her eyes shining. "It's everything I've dreamed of." Mr. Anderson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Emma, you've always had a gift for seeing potential in others. This is your chance to bring that gift to the world." Ethan grinned, wrapping his arms around her. "Mom, you're going to be amazing, just like you always are." The next few months were a whirlwind of planning and collaboration. Emma worked closely with the charity to design a program that paired homeless youth with mentors who could provide guidance, emotional support, and resources. They named the initiative the Kindness Network, a tribute to the ripple effect that small acts of compassion could create. Emma's role wasn't just as a figurehead. She was deeply involved in every aspect of the program, from recruiting mentors to meeting with potential donors. Her authenticity and passion drew people to the cause, and soon the Kindness Network was launched in cities across the country. The program's impact was immediate and profound. Young people who had been living on the streets found hope and stability through their mentors. Families were reunited, lives were rebuilt, and communities grew stronger. Emma often visited the local chapters, sharing her story and listening to the stories of the youth involved. One afternoon, At a chapter in Chicago, she met a young girl named Mia. Barely 15, Mia had been living in shelters for months after running away from an abusive home. Through the program, she had been paired with a mentor who helped her enroll in school and find a part-time job. "Thank you," Mia said, tears streaming down her face as she hugged Emma. "You gave me a chance when I thought I had none." Emma held her tightly, her heart full. "You're the one who's making it happen, Mia. You're brave and you're strong. Don't ever forget that." Moments like these reminded Emma why she had taken this path. Each success story fueled her determination to keep going. Even when the work felt overwhelming, she knew that every life changed was proof of the power of kindness. Back in her hometown, Emma's daycare program continued to thrive. Jane, the former waitress who had mocked Emma, became one of its most dedicated volunteers. Over time, she and Emma developed a genuine friendship, bonded by their shared commitment to helping others. "Funny how life works," Jane said one evening as they cleaned up after an event. "I used to judge you, and now I'm inspired by you every day." Emma smiled, placing a hand on Jane's shoulder. "We've all made mistakes, Jane. What matters is what we do next." As the years passed, the Kindness Network grew into a national movement. Emma became a sought-after speaker and author, but she never let the recognition go to her head. For her, the work was never about fame. It was about making a difference. Ethan, now a young adult, often joined her at events, sharing his perspective on their journey. "My mom taught me that kindness is the greatest strength we have," he would say, "and I've seen how it can change everything." Their bond remained unbreakable, a testament to the love and resilience that had carried them through their darkest days. One day, as Emma prepared for yet another event, Mr. Anderson visited her at the daycare. He looked around the bustling space, filled with children laughing and parents chatting, and smiled. "You've built something incredible here, Emma," he said, his voice filled with pride. "But more than that, you've shown people what's possible when you believe in someone." Emma hugged him, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mr. Anderson. You were the one who showed me what kindness looks like." The story of Emma and Ethan became a legend in their community, a symbol of hope and resilience. The park bench where they had first met was later adorned with a plaque, engraved with the words, "Kindness changes everything." Emma often brought Ethan there, sitting together and reflecting on how far they had come. As they watched the world go by, they were reminded of the incredible journey that had started with a single meal and a simple act of compassion. For Emma, the work would never be done, but she wouldn't have it any other way. She had discovered her purpose, and she was ready to keep spreading kindness, one life at a time. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, or thoughts in the comments, or thoughts in the comments.